Welcome to the Massive Change Show. I'm Justin Foster.
And I'm Dr. Virginia Lacayo. In each episode, we have conversation with leaders who are getting in some good trouble by challenging paradigms and shaking the system.
And after each conversation, the episode shifts to the second show, where Virginia and I chat about what we learned from the guest.
If you know of any leaders who will make a great guest, please introduce us.
And of course, if you enjoy the show, please like, share, and leave a review.
Thanks for listening.
In this episode of the Massive Change Show, we visit with my old friend, Gavin McMahon, about his new book, Story Business, and how we need to reclaim the beauty of storytelling in an age drowning in content slop. Enjoy the show. Hello, Gavin.
Hi.
So good to have you on our podcast. We were joking before we hit record that, you and I have been friends for many, many years, but we haven't talked in a long time, partially because you you disappeared while you were writing the book that is now released that you're going to be talking about on this podcast. But I just wanted to say, as your friend, I'm so proud of you for writing a book. And I suppose also, I wonder how much of it was peer pressure, because in the years I've known you since 2011. I know so many people that have said to you, Gavin, you should write a book. And so we're going to get into why you finally did it, if it was peer pressure. But we're super excited to talk to you about your new book. Just for context, you are the CEO and co-founder of fassforward, which is a very innovative business advisory strategic consulting group, and that I have worked with a number of times over the years. And again, there's a temptation to make this old home week, but we won't do that for this particular episode. So anyway,
That's
so
good,
welcome.
you would lose a whole foreign audience that didn't know what Old Home Week was.
Yes, that's true.
Would be like, what is that?
I don't even know where that term comes. It sounds very British when I say it, though. So I don't know what it means, but
I don't know what it means. But thank you for having me on, and nice to meet you, Virginia.
Nice meeting you too.
So we're just going to have a good old conversation here about your book, and I do want to start with that question of what was the kind of tipping point for finally, after all these years, deciding to write the book?
Yeah, well, it is true. A lot of people have said you should. I think you were one of the first. I think when you'd written your first book, the one about bacon and branding. You'd said it. A few people have said it, but that wasn't the reason. I'm pretty good at ignoring people when I want to ignore people. I think the reason it's a couple of different things. One is I have a fascination with why people do things on an individual level. Why, and it kind of comes out in a very sarcastic voice in my head. Why did you do that? That seems a very strange thing to do. And also that then gets bigger because if you put groups of people together or you think about companies, why did they do that is an endlessly fascinating question for me. So that was one reason. And then the second reason is, I think part of the answer to that is storytelling. And I had this jumble of stuff in my head. And a big part of our work is, we consider leadership to be about how do people make choices. And I think about storytelling as a way to amplify those choices. So I've always been, connected to this idea of decision and storytelling. And really the book was and it started out as an exercise in how do I get all this random stuff in my head down on a piece of paper so it actually begins to make sense rather than just make sense in small moments. That was the driving reason. And then I discovered along the way that I actually like writing, which does make it easier if you discover that. So that helped.
That's very good. Yeah. So again, this is some context. Is you really are a polymath, where you have so many different ways of seeing things similar to Virginia, you're very much what I call a mosaic thinker, which is you can get right down to this little tiny detail, but you can also see the big picture. And so there were a lot of things you could have written a book about, but you
Yeah.
chose to write about, like you started to talk about, the story and the convergence, basically story and business. That's the title. In and you've also seen business, especially in the United States, evolve over the years.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious about what makes this book particularly relevant right now in this kind of strange time of what's commonly referred to as VUCA that we're in now, of volatility,
Yeah. Yeah.
uncertainty, chaos, ambiguity, and hyperconnectivity. Why now? Why do you think this book is important now?
I think it's always important. I think even more now. I think if I had to pick two words to say why is it important now, my two words would be AI slop. It's just there's so much that if I think I grew up in an age where there was more and more stuff, the internet, the content overload, the noise, the amount of information, and trying to make sense of it all to be able to make a decision. I mean, I was talking to someone the other day. When I first entered the workforce, I worked for an engineering company in the defense industry, and I worked as a draftsman. So big drafting tables, drawing, tanks and submarines and things like that. And I was 20 something years old. There were 40-year-olds, so really old people. Were all at the drafting table, and there was one computer in the corner that was a PC, and another computer in the other corner that was a kind of standalone workstation. But it used to be an event if you got kind of one piece of new information a day, and then quickly email happened, and then the internet happened, and you just got overwhelmed with all this information. And I just think we're at a time now where it is all accelerating again. And so AI slot, I mean, there's some very entertaining stuff out there. There's a lot of it, but your ability as a human being to kind of make sense of the world, that's really fundamental. That's really fundamentally what stories are and what storytelling is. It's you as a human being trying to make sense of who you are and where you are. And I think for companies now, that's just more important than ever.
Yeah.
So what is the main premise of your book? What I mean,
Uh,
when people get it and say like, because I want to learn about this.
yeah, that was the really awkward question my publisher kept asking me as I was writing it, and I couldn't answer it. Or it took me a while. I had to finish it before I figured it out. I think so. I would put it like this. I think my parents lied to me. I'm pretty sure Justin's parents lied to him. I would think your parents lied to you, and I think
Oh
as a
yeah.
parent, you're probably lying to your kids. And the lie that everyone tells and is told is if you just work hard and if you just do the right thing, it'll all be okay. The world is a meritocracy. I noticed I was looking at your podcast before. You had someone talking about the fact that that is a myth. It took me a long time to figure out that is a myth. It's not true. But I think the premise of the book, the central premise of the book, if there is one, is it's never the best idea that wins. It's the best packaged idea. And so it's really all about that. How do you take ideas and package them? And I think there's a couple of other ideas that float around that. One is that, decisions happen in the collision of ideas. And so stories are really vehicles that carry ideas between people. And so if we're going to innovate, if we're going to get better, if we're going to do things, we need to be able to spread stories. I mean, that's really how civilization started. There's a little parable at the very beginning of the book where I talk about whoever it was that was the first storyteller. And the first storyteller is telling the tale of the hunt. And, she's telling the tale of somebody who sharpened a stick, and then somebody else who took the stick and took it to hunt and to the hunting ground and hunt, antelope or wild beast or whatever they were hunting. And I think the really important person in that story is not the person that invented the hunt or invented fire or did whatever they did. The really important person is the person that told the story about it, because that told other people how to do all these things. And so the clever person is the one that calls the stick a spear and gets people excited about it and says, you should try this thing. It's going to help, feed the tribe. So yeah, I think that's another idea, but it's really about that the best packaged idea. And the second, I would say there's a little bit of a myth I'm trying to bust in the book, which is I think most people would assume that if you're in marketing or branding or something like that, you should definitely read this book because it's about storytelling. And I think, yes, that's true, because I don't want to turn away any readers, but really everyone needs to read it. If you any kind of business, any kind of, if you lead, if you're in finance, if you're in product development, you actually need to get a whole lot better at storytelling, because it's fundamentally how we convey ideas to each other. It's how we build businesses. It's how we make decisions. And there are different genres of storytelling that you need to get and pay attention to.
So, how does one discern either, like, I love that you said this book is really for everyone, especially leaders. How, and you mentioned AI as well, and we are, and this really happened during the pandemic too, is just content became so mechanized. It became, everybody's got a blog and a book and a podcast, and and there's just so much content, and there's also so much propaganda. I mean, one of the reasons that we have such divisiveness, at least in the US, is that
Yeah.
there's sort of these competing, let's call it reality versus distortion. And we're not going to get into which is which, but there is definitely like people living in two different worlds. It's like Stranger Things and the Upside Down. So my question here is related to your overall philosophy of storytelling is how does one discern between storytelling and propaganda? And I ask it as both the creator of story and also the consumer of story. How do you know when it's a story, and how do you know when it's propaganda?
Okay. See, I don't think the podcast is long enough to answer this question,
So
but
that's
I'll have
okay.
a go. So a couple of things to set the table. There's a great TV show. It's on Netflix. I came across it because I was actually watching a conference that Shonda Rhimes was speaking at, and she said this is the best show on television. I thought, well, she might know because she's been pretty successful writing shows, and it's a show called Dark. It's in German. You have to deal with subtitles, but there's a line in it where one character says to the other, this is kind of weird science fiction type show. One character says to the other, "The truth is the story we tell." And I just think that line just stuck with me because I think it's so true. And if you dig into how our brains are wired, there's a lady who's a neuroscientist called Frederica Fabricius, and in her book, she talks about the idea that we have two modes in our brain. We have this mode where we're kind of daydreaming and we're just, not really focused at all. And she calls that the narrative network. And in the narrative network, we're taking all this information in, but we're always the center of the story. Everything is about us.
Mm-hmm.
So if you see a news piece about the economy, it's about you. If you see, what the weather's going to be like, it's about you. If you see, whether there's, a snarl up on the highway, it's basically about you. If you always relating it to you, and that's this kind of free flowing narrative network. And that's called, neuroscientists call that the default mode network. It's just basically our brains on idle, thinking everything is related to us, the narrative network. And then there's a task positive network, which is the other one. So now your brain clicks into gear, and the task positive network is you actually thinking and focusing. So that's, I think, the background context to all this information. And you talked about propaganda. Propaganda is, in my opinion, just a well-told story. The we're trying to say it's, is it true or is it not true, is almost pointless, because everything is editorialized. So if everything's editorialized, then you can always pick out something that's not quite exact or not quite true. It's like this is not to do with your bigger order question, but we run storytelling workshops. I had a data scientist in the workshop. He'd done a lot of work, and he had this kind of fundamental breakthrough in his survey and research that he'd done, and it was the answer to question number 73 in his 100-part survey. And he wanted to tell the board this really insightful thing, and he was thinking about how he could do it. And typically, if you talk to a data scientist or a researcher, the first thing they want to tell you is, how did I do all the research? How many people did I speak to, and how valid is my study? And I want to spend at least 15 minutes on that. And then he wanted to go through questions 1 through 72, which were not that interesting. And then he wanted to get to 73. And I'm like, why don't you just tell him the answer to question number 73? And he had a whole issue with that, because he would be sullying the purity of the study and what was done. I said, but no one cares. They just care about the thing that they care about, which is the answer to number 73. And I think it's the same thing. So, I mean, I haven't even got to the truth-telling part of it. There's a part in the book where I talk about leadership storytelling, and each section has rules. I think one of the true signs of good leaders is they are truth tellers, and they tell the truth, or at least as they see it, even if it's unvarnished or difficult. So if you think about, AI and layoffs and things, all those kind of things, are you going to, give it the corporate BS around that stuff, or are you going to tell the truth about what's going to happen? Because honestly, the more nerve-wracking thing for people is not knowing, or the feeling that they're being told something. I know I've kind of wandered off your question a bit, but
No, it's good. No, it's all connected. You're telling a story. Yeah.
Yeah. And I relate with so many things. I taking a lot of notes, because you said a lot of things that I wish we had the time to go deep into every one of your ideas, because you can unpack a lot of things with that. But
I can always
you
come
said
back.
something that is, yes, you say something that is true, and I think we haven't had the time to stop and think about it. But you're right. We have the overwhelm that we felt with email and internet started back in, a few decades ago, was overwhelming. And there was more discussion at that time about how the brain can actually not process all that information. We
Mhm.
become more selective up to the point. At this point, we even lost that capacity of being selective. The amount of information is so much, and is so polished in many ways, the delivery, that our brain is really confused about what to pick up, what not, how to distinguish what are facts and what are just
Yeah,
interpretations or stories. And with all that, the brain hasn't really evolved that much. I mean, there are some studies that talk about new generation, Gen Z especially, they're wired differently, partly because, the technology and all the information, how the brain has to process that. But I don't think, from a neurological perspective, I don't think that the brain has evolved that much anyway. I mean, we had adjust some skills, we have developed skills, but the brain hasn't changed that much. And the brains uh, really explain everything through stories, as you were saying. I mean, that's the only way we make sense of the world around us. We tell ourselves stories, even
yeah,
if they're not true, even if they're completely illogical or irrational or whatever. That's the way we understand it. It's the only way we make sense of the world. The same way that we still make decisions based on emotions. No matter how much we think we rationalize them, actually the way the brains work is that you make the decisions with emotions, through your emotions, based on your emotions, and then the brain takes on the task of justifying the emotions with rational thoughts and ideas. But is in that direction. And that means that maybe in this moment of time, in this era of the hyper technology overwhelm, is when we need more the storytelling skill to actually convey through the noise, to convey messages that can make sense to people, and just explain things in a way that it relates to people and people can identify with and can use, because everything is just a bunch of information and it's really hard for us to make sense of everything. So that's why we now hear a story
Yeah,
now in these times, and we get that idea way better than the amount of information that we get on internet, for instance, because the story is something that you can remember and you can relate and you can personalize. You can make it about you, and that makes sense with the rest of your belief systems.
yeah,
But just data, just information is extremely overwhelming. So if you want, as a leader, that's what I'm understanding that you're saying, is that if you as a leader, you want to let some message clear and to teach people something and say, like, okay, this is what we need to focus on, or this is what is important to learn and to understand, storytelling might be the most effective way, especially now in these days.
completely. I think more and more. I mean, at the end of the day, there are some things that are not going to change about business. And maybe if you project hundreds of years into the future, it may change. But certainly in my lifetime, a couple of things are not going to change. It's always going to be about people. You may not have a 50,000 person workforce. You may have a 5,000 person workforce, but there are people that you have to somehow get engaged and get on board. And at the end of the day, you're there as a business to create value. And the simple way of thinking about create value is sell stuff. Every business is the same. I mean, McKinsey will tell you that they all have different strategies and different, but they're all the same. They all sell stuff. What they sell and how they sell it is different. That's where kind of McKinsey comes in to tell you what the difference is, maybe. But it's all about selling stuff, and it's all about people. And if you one of the best, I think, explanations of that creation of value. Um, I'm blanking on the name. The book is called Better, Simpler Strategy, and I'm blanking on the name. I'll tell you later when it pops into my head. But he talks about this idea of a value stick, where basically you want to buy things as cheap as buy your resources as cheap as possible and sell as many of them for as much as possible, or sell as much as possible. And all you're trying to do is extend that line in value. The thing about storytelling is, if you think about a company of 100 people or 500 people, you've got 100 people somewhere between buying and selling that are making decisions every day. And those decisions are incrementally adding value or destroying value. And that is never going to change. I also want to come back to something you said about emotion. There's a line, I think this is where business mostly goes wrong, because we like to think we're hyper rational, but we're not. What we really are is we are great rationalizers of things that we've already decided to do. And
That's right.
so the line that I always remember is, reason leads to judgment and emotion leads to action. And 90% of the time, what we're trying to do is to get somebody somewhere to take an action, whether it's buy something, click on a link, whatever it is we're trying to do. We want them to take an action. And if you don't have emotion, that is not going to happen.
That's right. And we know that stories are the best way to convey, to evoke emotions from somebody. It's like, because you're talking about things that people can relate to, people can project themselves into, people can visualize, and that's where emotions start working. If you only talk to the left side of the brain, the rational part, the data, the logic, then it's going to make a judgment. It's going to say this is good or bad, but it's not necessarily going to create that impulse of taking an action, because we do be, I mean, and this is a fascinating topic for me, but what I learned is that emotions is what really triggers our behavior, is
Yeah.
because is the way our brain makes sure that we either feel the emotions that we want to feel, or stop feeling the emotion we don't want to feel or we are rejecting. And so you do something to either or. Everything we do is because we want to feel something or we want to not feel something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everything we do. So stories, if they make us feel things, then is holistic. Our brain, our heart, our soul, everything is gonna be compelled to either do more of that or do something that will create that emotion for us. Can be security, the feeling of power, can be any emotion, or is gonna help us, is gonna give us the impulse of do something to not feel that emotion. For instance, or all the marketing and stories that come through some companies about making you feel disadjusted or fat or wrong or poor or unhappy or etc., are really stories to make you behave in a way that will purchase something to avoid that emotion, to avoid feeling
Yeah.
that way, or
Yeah.
to feel better. So yeah, very, very
Have
strong
you
still.
read, there's a book called Descartes' Error by, I think the name is Antonio Damasio. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. But he's a neuroscientist on the West Coast somewhere. And he has this hypothesis. It's called the somatic marker hypothesis. Basically what it is that the idea is that we do not make a decision unless there's some kind of emotional element involved. And a somatic marker could be traumatic, but it could be just mildly interesting marker that was laid down in our brain. At some point, we reached for that hot pan and it didn't go well, and so
Mhm.
therefore I'm going to make this decision in this way. And so all our, what your grandma told you about making a gut decision is kind of proven out by neuroscience, that they're not actually made in the gut, but we make them without thinking about it, and it's due to these somatic markers, and it's very emotional. And people that have trouble accessing their emotions also have a lot of trouble making decisions, whether it's figuring out what shoe to put on in the morning, whether it's the left foot
Yeah.
or the right foot.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they generally suck at telling stories too. Have you noticed that? Like the people that low emotional intelligence is almost requires a kind of bullying level of power in order to get anything done, because there's no storytelling requires a level of being in touch with your emotions, because that's part of what you're conveying. So, okay, so in the book, you talk about, and one of the things I love that you did is it wasn't just like a nerd book on storytelling, as you've got some historical context in there, and you kind of draw this line similar to the book Sapiens, where you draw this line between like cave painting and PowerPoint. And
Yeah.
so the question behind that is, the allegory of the cave was written in somewhere around probably around 380 BC, and it was, the whole point of the allegory of the cave is it was an amazing story about basically how our biases distort our realities, our sense of
Mhm.
reality. And Virginia, you mentioned earlier that the brain, at least maybe with Gen Zers, this has changed a little bit, but this brain is pretty much the same as when the allegory of the cave was written, you know. And what I'm curious about, Gavin, from your perspective, looking at it historically, is why is it? What do you think it is in human nature, neuroscience, the way that humans are wired, that they still haven't learned the lesson of the allegory of the cave? They haven't learned the lesson that what you think is reality is probably not true. And it's, yes, it's related to story, but there's something deeper in there that I'm really interested in your take on that.
I'm not sure I have a take on that. I think, I mean, I can I can tell you Mostly, I'm not sure because I'm not exactly sure what you're driving at with the allegory of the cave.
Okay.
The,
Okay. Well,
is it
so
the idea
I
that
can.
we just perceive reality around us, or
Yeah.
the reality
Yeah.
is what we perceive?
So philosophy in general, whether it's Descartes or Plato or the Stoics or
Yeah.
Jesus or Buddha, there's a commonality. Just as there's a
Hmm.
commonality in storytelling, there's a commonality in philosophy. Is is a kind of necessity of critical thinking. And it seems like that we are drawn to stories to sort of enlighten us, to kind of liberate us from things that aren't true. That was the point of the allegory of the cave. He wrote it as kind of a liberation story that that the truth will set you free. He didn't say that, but it's kind of what the
Hmm.
story was about. And so that was thousands of years ago. Yet here we are today, still in these, like, even more so, these reality distortion chambers, and yet storytelling still remains an essential practice of leadership, essential practice of raising and being good humans too. And I guess my question is what do you think is in the human psyche that we still trust? And Virginia, please answer this too, is why do we still trust our own bullshit? Like, I guess that's what I'm really trying to say, is why do we believe our own bullshit before we understand, like, the deeper meaning of a story?
Well, I think I'm not saying I'm an expert on this, but from a perspective of story, I would say
Yeah.
this. I think I think we're always looking for coherence. We're always looking for things to make sense. So we will take a series of heretofore unexplained events and kind of weave a path between event one and event two and event three and event four, and somehow, because it's connected through a narrative, it then begins make sense of it. We don't like it when things don't make sense as human beings. So in the absence of sense, we create our own nonsense to to make it connect, and we usually do that in the form of a story. That's why conspiracy theories will never go away. They're just a way of taking seemingly unrelated facts and then tying them together. And by the way, some conspiracy theories turn out to be true. And
Right.
by the way, that's how, if you watch enough detective shows, they take unrelated fact one, unrelated fact two, and then it strings together into a narrative that makes sense. Narratives and stories are how we make sense of the world. So it's not surprising that even though there's more and more volume of information, even though there's more and more AI stuff, we're still looking for narratives that make sense. I think what makes it harder is kind of the information ecosystem that we live in. So if you only have to go back 50 years or 30, 40 years, and pre-internet, you basically had two or three TV channels and two or three main newspapers in any particular country. And the narrative was very much kind of centralized and editorialized. I'm not sure it's controlled. It depends on the country you were in. If you were in 1930s Germany, it was very much controlled and there's propaganda and everything else. But every country has that. And growing up in that country, you knew which were the right leaning newspapers, which were the left, but they never got that far. I think what's happened is basically then the internet happened and then social media happened. So you had this kind of balkanization of information. The early days of the internet, pre-social media, had a ton of places to go to, but it was still very much managed. There was a kind of, when people were still going to Yahoo because it had a central list of, like, here's where all the stuff on sports is, that it was still kind of a filtered way. And then social media balkanized it even more, personalization fractionalized it even more. And so now we live in these information ecosystems where we essentially we don't only control the narrative net. Well, we subconsciously have this narrative network going on in our head where we're the center of our own story, but we have the tools around us to build a narrative outside of us. So every one of us can live in an information bubble of our own choosing, and we do. Whether we actually are conscious about it or not is completely not true. Before, we lived in an information bubble just in our head, and we read the daily newspaper or watched the evening news. Now we can construct this information bubble around us. And then with AI, I think you're getting to this next layer where you can actually construct your own narrative. I mean, because AI, at least this stage of AI, so much wants to please you, you can construct a narrative to do exactly what you want. So, that line between sense and nonsense is really getting blurred.
Yeah. And I will add something. I mean, it's absolutely true. As I was saying, the brain hasn't evolved that much. Our brain is very limited. We like to think that we humans are very complex and very evolved compared to other animals, but we're still very limited in considering everything how the world is really. And that limitation shows in several ways. One is we're still binary. We still have a linear thinking. It's very hard for the brain to understand the complexity of life and the world. So we try to simplify it, and we make cause effect direct connections, and we make it 1, 2, 3 in that order and left to right. I mean, we still think that way, and we try to organize the world around us in a linear way, and it's not. So just doing that exercise is going to distort reality, and it's going to separate what is real from what is the story that we make in our head. The other thing is that asking people to learn the lesson, you said why they haven't learned the lesson yet, that reality is not the same as what we tell ourselves it is because it's asking them to not be human. It's asking their brain to not do its job. The job of the brain, especially the primitive brain, that is the part of our brain that hasn't evolved much. There is the logical, but the primitive brain, its job is to protect you. Is to protect you from harm, from risk, from danger, but also protect your identity, your ideas, your values, is to protect who you think you are and your idea of the world, so it makes sense. So it becomes somehow predictable to you, because it's not, but to you, it becomes predictable somehow. It softens the uncertainty that is the representation of danger for us, is like uncertainty. And so you make sense. Telling the stories that you need to tell yourself based on your level of consciousness, based on your experience, based on other things that make sense to you, that makes you feel that you are safe. Because at the end is the most primitive instinct, is security, is to stay alive. And the brain doesn't distinguish the danger of being attacked by an animal or a car, or hit by a car, and the danger of the unpredictability, of uncertainty, is the same. Everything is against, you're going to die, according to your brain. So it needs to protect you from that by telling you whatever you need to hear based on your level of consciousness, to keep you believing that you're safe, even if none of that is true. And makes it easy with all the overwhelming of information, plus the capacity that we have as humans to create that bubble that Gavin was describing, to use that technology and use all that information to just reinforce that idea that you have about yourself and about others and about the world in a way that bubbles you, because that it will keep you safe. And you have enough technology, as you say, Gavin, that AI is very people pleaser. You have enough technology on your side to reinforce that idea by, an outside validation, let's say. It's like the technology is saying, so it must be true. So I'm right.
I don't know. Yeah, I think you're 100% right. This is related. I'm not. It's kind of related to storytelling. I think it's related to what you were saying, Virginia. This didn't end up in the book, but I found this fascinating. It's the role of gossip in society, and linguists believe that gossip, telling stories about other people, the reason that we do that, and businesses have gossip, they have rumor mills, the little ecosystem of friends that you have, and the bubble of that everyone lives in. We all kind of talk to each other about each other. And the role is to kind of keep the rules and keep the boundaries. So you gossip about and talk about the things that you think are kind of at the edge, that the edge of normal. So I think it connects to this idea of keeping us safe, because safe is I'm in the middle of my comfort zone, and I'm normal. I'm not weird like everyone else is. These people at the edges are weird, and I want to gossip and talk about them because I'm the one in the middle and I'm normal. But everyone, I mean, that's crazy when you think about it, because that's everyone doing that. And everyone has this their own little bubble and their own little perspective of what's normal and what's weird and who they're going to gossip about and tell stories about. And I just find that fascinating. Didn't make it into the book though.
Oh, that's
I
why
have
we
a
do these
question for
podcasts.
you, Gavin. Yeah, I have a question about your book and your stance on storytelling. We understand, and I think it's pretty clear that is absolutely essential. That if you
Mm-hmm.
want to really connect with someone and invite them to do something, to change their behavior, or to take on a behavior to do something or stop doing something, and can be for profitable purpose or just social reasons or anything
Yeah.
in your values, you need to know how to tell stories. But I believe, and you tell me if you agree with me, I believe that storytelling is a skill. It's not that not everybody knows how to tell a story. And how you become a good storytelling, is there a formula? There is how you learn that skill in a way that helps you to really tell a story or share an information that makes sense to other people, to a lot of people that have a completely different worldviews and way of interpret reality. That's a skill, to tell a story that resonates with a lot of different people, and
Mm-hmm.
also that is emotional enough that really compels people to take action. How do you learn that skill?
Okay, so I definitely agree. It's a skill. The you I can remember he's a lot older now, but when my son came home on a from a school bus and he would be telling me a story of whatever happened that day, it would be, and this happened, and this happened, and it was just a whole string of stuff that's in it. And he's my son, and I love him, but I really wanted him to get to the end of that story because it's just so painful to listen to. He's got a lot better now. So if it's a skill, then everyone can get better at it. That's the first thing that you need to know, is that you have to have that mindset that you can learn and you can get better. And I think, like all skills, it's a couple of things, and this applies to any skill. Figure out what the fundamentals are. You have to know what the fundamentals of storytelling are. I cover them in quite detail in the book. I'll tell you a couple in a minute. But if you know what the fundamentals are, then you can practice the fundamentals. And that's the other thing that you have to be good at, is you have to be willing to take something and practice it. So what is storytelling? I think, yeah, Justin mentioned earlier, I have this historical thread in the book. I went a few years ago. I went to the British Museum and I saw these tablets from they're Assyrian sculpture, and they're from a king who was called Ashurbanipal. And if you see these tablets, they're made of gypsum, so it's kind of very uh, chalky stone. They're about 6 or 7 feet high, and they show these reliefs. So they're carved like comic panels, and they're carved reliefs. So they're yay thick. They're not very thick, but there's a little bit of three dimensionality, and you see the king hunting a lion or holding a quill or and there's cuneiform stamped into these reliefs, and they're like comic panels. And it struck me that actually that was really similar to PowerPoint. It was like a really oldie timey version of PowerPoint, because it's words, structure, and pictures. And I think those are the basic building blocks of story. By the way, if you look at if you pay attention to words, if you think about structure, and if you know what pictures are, then you can start to assemble your own stories. Words are, like little carriers of meaning, and the word that you choose is important. There's a reason political parties will pay people to decide, should we call this an estate tax or a death tax, because that word will put you on one side of the argument or the other side of the argument. So words. And if you really start to get into words, you can get to rhetoric and all the kind of language that really is persuasive, and the way it sounds good to the ear. Structure. A lot of people are not too good at structure. They start wherever they want to start, go on, and then they just stop. But we think about a structure we use over and over again is hook, meet, payoff. So I need to have a hook. I need to get people leaning in, thinking this is going to be interesting. And then I need meat. And the meat can't be everything I know. It just needs to be a few little chunks that will give you the argument that you need. And then the payoff is the action that I want you to do. So that's structure. You need to get good at structure. And then the last thing is pictures. Pictures are the kind of sticky stuff, the engagement of the mind's eye. So you can, in my view, every book you ever read is a picture book. Because even if it doesn't literally have pictures in it, you are creating pictures. If it's written well, you're creating pictures in people's heads. If you watch, go to the movies, you literally are seeing pictures. But all those three things come together. And I think really good storytellers are really good at balancing all three things and putting them together. And that to me was I got that going to the British Museum and looking at Ashurbanipal and his reliefs. He was a spy master before he was his father's spy master before he inherited the empire. So he had the biggest library in the world before the Great Library of Alexandria, and so he was really into this, idea about how do you capture information, how do you move information around. He used it to run and grow his empire. He's a interesting character. But anyway, yeah, that's what I would say. And then. By the way, and then it takes a lot of time, like every skill.
Yeah.
Just lots of cycles.
Lots of reps.
The good thing is that you can practice your storytelling skills every single day, all day. Because as long as you're communicating with people, I mean, you have children, you can practice that every day. You have your partner, you can tell about your story or your day or about your ideas or your work, telling the stories. I mean, you can practice that skill every day. You don't need to wait until you're on a stage or like a big presentation. Yeah.
And I would say tell jokes. No, I don't mean, you need to be on stage and have a Netflix special or an HBO special, or you even need to do an open mic night. But if you actually learn to tell jokes reasonably well, and you have a little library of jokes that you can trot out at the appropriate moments with the appropriate audience, jokes are just two stories. They're a story that kind of gets people, oh, and then what happened? And then there's a punchline that is just a whole different, it went in a different direction. If you get good at doing that, it's when we coach people around executive presence, I often will get CFOs, for example, and I had one CFO that basically I chased him to tell me a joke the next time he just refused to do it. But if you can get good at it, it's a really good way of practicing storytelling. Tell jokes.
Yeah.
I won't tell one here because it'll be assessed brutally.
Well, humor is a unifier, there's not a lot of unifiers. Humor, music, dogs, they're unifiers. But sometimes sports. So I love that, and it's funny too, where it's that you talked about semantic or the schema in the brain. And so everybody, and I remember I learned this from you, is like everybody comes in to hear you talk, and they got their own kind of sort of, biases about how they think this is going to go. They looked at the topic that you're speaking on, or they looked you up. But a joke is a way to sort of break that schema. And I have a keynote called The Art of Unfinishing, and it's about like being more fluid and agile in, business and not being so rigid. And And my opening line is, men are obsessed with finishing. And it always, there's this little gasp in the audience because, and then there's kind of a chuckle and, now I got him, because it's not like we're going to talk about all the things that they read in the little synopsis. It's like, oh, this is different. And
Yeah, it's a hook.
so it's a hook, right? It's the hook to exactly. And I learned that from you. I think I have some natural skills, but that hook meet payoff, I use that probably every day in some form or another. Um, the other thing is that I'm curious if it made it into if it made it into the book the way you used to teach it. Is you used to have, I don't know if you still do this, but there was a survey that people could take to kind of understand their presentation style. And
Oh
that
yeah.
was based off this theory that you had. I'm curious if you still believe this, that to Virginia's prior question about storytelling as a skill, is that everyone has a particular storytelling style that kind of matches their brain. Do you still
Yeah.
believe that's true? And do you talk a little bit about that if you still believe that?
So I still believe it's true. I will not scientifically argue it with anyone that has a. I don't. It's not founded in brain science. It
Mm-hmm.
really is around. It's really about observation of
Mm-hmm.
that trio of words, structure, and pictures. And it's the idea that typically we're good at two of them and not so good at the other one. And
Mm.
I think if we used to call them presentation types, I call them storytelling types now. And if you do the math and you have an order of three, you end up with six different types of storyteller. And so you get people like one type we call a counselor would be um, word structure pictures. So in that sense, they're very good at speaking to a structure. So they'll speak in a very logical order. You can have a lot of detail. They'll remember everything. They don't have a problem doing it. But pictures, they don't really bother with. So what does that mean? Does that mean they don't have pictures on their PowerPoint slides? Well, not really. What it really means is they speak in a very dry and clinical way that's kind of boring. And so because there's no engagement, there's no lighting up of the mind's eye in the way that they speak. So yeah, I think observationally, I think it's completely true. We still use it today. It did not make it into the book because it started out as a chapter in the book and then it got bigger and bigger. So it's actually going to be it's the book I'm working on now, which is going to be called The Six Storytellers. So thank you
How
for
about
that
that? Look at
preview.
that setup. Not even
Yeah.
knowing. You're welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I'll come
The,
back
the,
on when that
yeah,
in a
when
2 years time when it
well,
Yeah.
actually finishes.
yeah, right, yeah. We'll have one conversation privately, and then you'll disappear for again, and you'll come
Yeah,
back, and yeah,
I'm good at
um,
ghosting people.
yeah. Well, it's a skill.
Yeah.
um, so I'm going to really put you on the spot from a brand
Hmm.
perspective. There's a lot of books about storytelling. Donald
Hmm.
Miller is sort of the category owner with his story brand structure, but there's many.
Hmm.
What do you think a leader, being that's your primary audience here, what do you think a leader is going to learn from your book that they're not going to learn from other storytelling books? And
I
don't be
think it's all
humble.
how an application. It's
Okay.
if you read any of those other books, it's something we've talked about before when we've talked about running workshops or anything else. I think most people that have great ideas around whatever it is, fierce conversations or start with
Hmm.
why. Simon Sinek goes in, gives a great song and dance about start with why. Everyone says, yeah, that's fantastic. And then you said it right at the beginning. Then
Hmm.
no one, in our conversation today, then
Yeah.
no one does it. Why do they
Yeah.
not do it? Because we don't know how. So I think you've got
Mm.
this Thursday to Monday gap where I just saw Simon Sinek speak and it's brilliant. We should start with why. And then they fly back on Friday, they answer all their emails, and on Monday they're just back to the grindstone and they have no idea how. So I think
Hmm.
story business is written for people that want to know how.
Mm.
It's written for people that think that maybe storytelling can help me with my idea in my part of the business, whether I'm in finance or whether I'm in HR or whether I'm in product. Doesn't matter where I am. I don't have to be in marketing to own the vehicle of storytelling. I can just be a better storyteller. That's who it's for.
Very good.
I feel like I'm being assessed from a brand perspective about whether that
Oh
was a
hell
good
yeah, you
answer.
are. Of course you are. And I said that's really good. That's a good, clear, confident answer. I was
Thank
expecting you to
you.
get all humble about it, but I think becoming an author has made you a little bit more arrogant. So,
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
any final questions for Gavin before we let him go, Virginia?
Oh, we can keep talking about how the brains process stories and what we do with them and how we use them. And especially, I mean, the skills is true that, and we have, I think that even at school, they try, not that they succeed, but they try to tell us how to tell a story. So they say like the introduction, then the conflict, then the climax, and, the resolution. And they help us to, or they try to teach us how to structure our the presentations of our ideas that way. That doesn't make us a storyteller. I mean, learning, I think, and this is just going a little deeper, Gavin, in your answer, is that's the basic is to understand the elements of the story. What you said, the hook, the structure, the resolution at the end. But there's something else. I'm trying to think what is, I think one of the elements could be, I mean, there's something else that makes that structure not being too mechanical when you try to apply it. I mean, what makes people that follow the rules or follow the formula, let's say, be so natural and engaging versus others that tell a story, but it's like, no, that's a good story. That's it, but not, you don't engage with them really that much. So there is some skills and qualities that comes with becoming a good storyteller that is beyond just telling a story in a good way. I don't know if I'm explaining myself.
Where it goes from mechanical to natural.
Yes, and to natural, but also to, you can tell a story and people can listen to the story and say, like, that's a good story, versus you can tell the story and having people really at the edge of their seat and remembering you and remembering the story forever. There is a nuances between how, and it's all about the storyteller, is how you tell the story, not just the components of the story or the elements of the story, but how you tell them, how you communicate them. And small things like, for instance, one thing that I learned from a good, really the best storyteller I know is one of my professors and mentors. He said, the first thing when you decide what to say is that us, especially when we know something and we want to share knowledge and use the stories to share knowledge, is to remember that it's not about what you want to say, but what people want and can hear and listen to and learn. So it's very difficult for some people, and I know it's been difficult for me to limit myself and say, like, it's not about what I want to share and all the things that I want to say and everything that I want people to understand and to know, but to really understand your audience and say, what do they want to hear and what they are in condition or capable of grasping or understanding or using, because that's really what the information, the relevant information lies, is to make that distinction. But beyond that is what characteristics of the personality or the style are important to make a story really get in people's memory and being used later on, like decades after that, versus just that's a good story.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer to that, except it's like everything. It's practice. You get better. The good thing about telling stories is you have immediate feedback, and I think a
If
lot
you
of things you don't.
That's true. Yeah, it's like you used to say that, storytelling or speech is the rare planned leadership moment too. It's
Mm.
like, you have to, and Virginia, you kind of alluded to this, like you're aware that you're on a stage of some sort, so don't screw it up by being boring or like I always say, especially with white dudes, it ends up being cheesy, creepy, or boring. So just eliminate those three things, and you're probably going to be, and learn how to tell a story. You're probably going to be pretty memorable. But if you look at it from a historical perspective, it's not, and I'm not challenging the fact that your book is a how-to book, because I think that's brilliant. But sticky structures are in the arc of history are allegories or metaphors or parables, from Aesop's fables to
Yeah.
Jesus's parables to the stories in the Torah or Old Testament Bible. If you can learn how to do an allegory or a parable, and you do it in a way that makes people go, "Huh, I never thought about it that way before," that's going to outlive you way longer than you know. How to. I always remember the metaphor you used to use of the showing someone, was it the nuclear submarine manual, and then the it was
Oh
like
yeah.
versus the manual for how to use your remote,
Remote
and
control.
how similar they were.
Yeah.
Like learning how to do those things is not going to make you memorable. It might be useful, but to me, the true essence of story is that you did sort of shift someone's thinking, and you made them question something, where they do say the holy grail of all storytelling is when they say, "Oh, I never thought about it that way before." That's the beautiful part.
Well, it's got to be interesting, and I think interesting starts with you, because if you're not interested in it,
Mhm.
it's definitely not going to be interesting to them. But then that's a slippery slope, because if it's interesting to you, and it's so interesting to you that you're just ignoring what's important to them, then you have a real problem. So
That's right.
there's always this kind of dance. You have to be authentically interested in whatever you're saying, and you have this curse of knowledge that you have to get past, where you just have to kind of hone it down to something just enough. The thing about stories, in researching the book, there's a little piece about Hemingway in there, and he calls it the iceberg theory. And so he's
Mhm.
famously someone that was a fantastic writer, and he would always talk about what you need to leave out. And I think that is one of the hardest things,
Mhm.
is leaving stuff out, because people don't need to know all this stuff. They just need
Mhm.
to know
Yeah.
enough to take the action that you want them to take.
Yes,
Yeah.
and there is a predisposition to over explain. And I say this from a branding perspective, is that the more the over explaining, and especially in a story or brand language, is a sign of insecurity. And it also means you don't trust the audience to sort of figure it out for themselves.
Mm.
And which always reminds me of one of my favorite jokes is, what do you call two men mansplaining to each other? A podcast. So and
What's
with
the
that,
secret? What's the secret of humor? Timing. No, it's
timing. Yes, yes, exactly. Well, speaking of time and timing, we need to let you go. This was, of course, fascinating. Best of luck with the book.
thank
I'm
you.
sure that it's gonna, as you have done over the years, it's going to change the way people think. And I can't wait to hear about book two. I'm glad it was such an inspiration for you to talk about it.
I hope so. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you both.
All right. Take care.
See
Thank
you.
you.